Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and in today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my 2019 NFL preview series, taking a look at the NFC West. Now, before I get started with this preview, I just want to say that if you like this video and you're a fan of the channel as a whole, please leave a like and subscribe below. It really goes a long way towards building up this channel. And if you have any thoughts on this episode, on this topic, and anything related to the NFL and sports in general, please leave a comment. I'd like to see your guys' thoughts and discuss those with you. You can also follow me on Twitter as well. That will be in the description below. So we're going to begin this preview by looking at the Arizona Cardinals, who are coming off a disastrous 2018 season. Now, it was obvious that they were going into a rebuilding phase last year after Carson Palmer and some of their veterans decided to move on and retire from that Bruce Arians era. So they brought in a new head coach in Steve Wilks, who was more of a defensive-minded guy, and then they traded up to go get Josh Rosen in the first round of last year's draft. And while there was some reason for some optimism early in the year, that kind of went away quickly. They had an historically inept offense. Josh Rosen really struggled, but I can't really blame that much on him because he had some very incompetent coaching supporting him. Just not a lot there for this team when you look at them going into the future after the season. So with Steve Keim's really his job on the line here, this is really a make-it-break-it year for him as a GM. He decided to go all in on a new direction and try to bring some fire and some a new direction to this franchise. So they fired Wilkes and they brought in Cliff Kingsbury, one of the most out-of-left-field hires I think you'll ever see from an NFL team for head coaching. He's another young, bright, offensive guru type of guy to bring in for your head coach, which is kind of the trend now going on for these NFL teams. Cliff Kingsbury was a guy that was a coach at his alma mater at Texas Tech for a pretty decent stretch. I think it was about 7 years he was a coach there. And while his teams were never good and they were always seemingly having a losing record, they put up historic numbers on offense, and that's what Steve Keim wanted to do here. He wanted to completely reinvent the offense. So you look at what they did in free agency, it's pretty clear that they wanted to bring in some veteran help as much as they can to kind of support this roster as they kind of continue this rebuild here, kind of making this a makeshift competitive team. You look at guys like Jordan Hicks, a linebacker from the Eagles on a 4-year, $34 million contract. That's an upgrade there in their linebacking core. Bringing in Robert Alford at cornerback on a 3-year, $22.5 million deal. He's planned to be their number 2 corner besides Patrick Peterson. Darius Philon, defensive tackle on a 2-year, $10 million contract. Terrell Suggs from the Baltimore Ravens on a 2-year, $10 million deal. They're also bringing guys like J.R. Sweezy, offensive guard, Michael Crabtree at wide receiver, and then Brooks Reed from the Atlanta Falcons on a 1-year deal to kind of be a run-stopping outside linebacker for them. They didn't really lose anybody in terms of key losses. Maybe some veterans from that Bruce Arians era, such as Deion Buchanan. They let him go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Trey Boston ended up leaving as a safety. Marcus Golden was a solid pass rusher for them with potential, but he's been dealing with injuries, so they let him go to the Giants. Antoine Bethea, they'll let him go to the Giants, and Mike Iupati, who's been their starting offensive guard for the last few seasons. So moving on from free agency to the draft, the entire offseason was centered around what the Arizona Cardinals were going to do with their number 1 overall pick. They had a guy that they just drafted in Josh Rosen, who, you would think with the offensive guru and Cliff Kingsbury that you want to build around. But Cliff Kingsbury has been a fan of Kyler Murray ever since he was recruiting him coming out of high school. And it was pretty clear early on that Cliff Kingsbury wanted to go in that direction. So there was a lot of talk of what they would do with that pick, and they ended up going with Kyler Murray, moving on from Josh Rosen, trading him away to the Miami Dolphins for a 2nd and 5th round pick. And before I get into the rest of this draft and what they did, I just want to comment on that trade. I thought the Arizona Cardinals really played themselves here, trying to outsmart the NFL by holding on to Josh Rosen for such a long time. I'm pretty sure that they knew that Kyler Murray was going to be their guy weeks, if not months in advance, once they hired Cliff Kingsbury. So it really didn't make much sense to me to keep Josh Rosen around because his value was at its most early on in the offseason because teams haven't established what they want to do in terms of the draft with their quarterback situation. They haven't figured out who their veteran starter is going to be. So you could have gotten a lot more for Josh Rosen early in the offseason once you hired Cliff Kingsbury. So it made no sense for me to hold on to him for such a long time, and it didn't really work out. I thought they got very little in return for a guy that, I'm not the highest on Josh Rosen, but he certainly has the potential to maybe be a franchise quarterback if he goes into the right situation. So that was a bit of a head scratcher for me, but nonetheless, they're all in on Kyler Murray as their franchise quarterback going into the future. And you can see in the rest of this draft that they want to surround him with young weapons to build with and to kind of grow and develop a chemistry with as they continue on this path of rebuilding. So in the second round, they went out and they got Andy Isabella with that pick that they got from the Dolphins. Andy Isabella, he's kind of an undersized receiver, but he's got great speed, very good quickness, and he's kind of a deep threat for this offense, which is what this air raid type of scheme needs. In round 4, they got a guy like Hakeem Butler out of Iowa State, a big jump ball type of guy, not the most consistent route runner or consistent hands, but he's got a lot of potential. And then in the 6th round, Keyshawn Johnson, wide receiver out of Fresno State, another young guy to bring into this offense. They also made some picks on the defensive side of the ball that I really liked. On the 2nd round, Byron Murphy, cornerback out of Washington. I really like his size and his fluidity and coverage. I think he was one of the better cornerbacks in this draft. I like the value there at the first pick in the 2nd round. In the 3rd round, Zach Allen, a versatile pass rusher out of Boston College. He's not really a guy that comes off the edge or really an interior rusher, but he can kind of do a little bit of both. So I like the versatility there. And then in the 5th round, I like the pick of Deontay Thompson, safety out of Alabama. I don't know if he'll be a starter for this team, but he could develop into a solid role player, I think, down the line for this unit. So when I break down this roster as a whole, we're going to start with the offense. It's pretty clear now that they are all in on this air raid, crazy Kingsbury system. And that's fine. If you're going to hire Cliff Kingsbury, who I did not, I was not a fan of that hire. I thought that was a way too out of left field pick for me. But if you're going to go in that direction, you have to go all in on it. And you can't just dip your toe in there and just not make a full commitment to it. You have to go all in. So that's what they're doing with the Kingsbury thing here. And when you have a guy like Kyler Murray, I think he's a player that fits like a glove in his scheme and what he wants to do on offense, but he will need time to develop. He's going to be a young, rookie, inexperienced quarterback, only 1 year as a starter at Oklahoma. And I think, there are some talented pieces around him, but this offense is a very long ways away from being what I would call even an above average unit. I think it might take them a year or two to really develop into what Cliff Kingsbury wants this offense to be. So when you look at the weapons surrounding Kyler Murray, obviously they still have Larry Fitzgerald, who's still around. He's one of the best receivers of all time, but he's not the same player he once was, obviously. He's probably in the last year or two of his career before he retires, but he's still a solid player. He can still be productive, and I think he's a nice safety valve for Kyler to throw to. And then the rest of this receiving core is just filled with young guys to spread the ball around. Christian Kirk, who they drafted last year in the 2nd round, I think he could really break out in this offense. I think he fits like a glove in this scheme. You also have Andy Isabella and Keyshawn Johnson, who will have roles in this offense. Overall, there's a lot of talent, but they're going to need to grow and develop together. But the one wild card here, I think, for this offense is David Johnson at the running back position. David Johnson was a guy that we were considering maybe the best running back in football in 2016 when he had his big breakout season. But in 2017, he dealt with injuries. And then last year, he was just stuck behind a terrible offensive line and incompetent coaching, which really held him back, I feel like. I still think he's one of the top 7 or 8 running backs in all of football. He's a great threat out of the backfield as a receiver. You can line him up outside in the slot and kind of have him run routes from a variety of different ways. David Johnson has said in the past that he wants 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving in the same season, kind of similar to what Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk have done in the past. And I think he certainly has the talent to do so. And I think in this offense, Kingsbury is going to find a lot of creative ways to get him the ball in space and allow him to make that type of statistical goal and output. But unfortunately for this offense, what really holds them back is the offensive line. It's just an absolute travesty. It's one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. You start up front at the left tackle position, DJ Humphries. He's probably their best offensive lineman, but he certainly isn't all that great. whatsoever. At left guard, Justin Pugh is, fine. He used to be a lot better in New York, but injuries have kind of slowed him down. He's not quite the same player. Mason Cole was their starting center last year, but right now it looks like AQ Shipley is going to be starting for them at center. He isn't very good. J.R. Sweezy, I've never been a fan of him at right guard. And then Marcus Gilbert, they got him from Pittsburgh. He's all right when he's healthy, but he's never healthy. So overall, I'm just not a big fan of this offensive line. I feel like they should have done a lot more in this offseason, in free agency, and in the draft to address that position group. Because we've seen in the past how an offensive line can just absolutely not only put your quarterback in harm's way, but absolutely destroy an offense because it will just not allow you to do what you want to do with your play calling. So that's going to be something that they're going to be dealing with all season long. So overall, I'm not too high on their offense as of right now, but there is potential going into the future of a potential explosive unit if Cliff Kingsbury can stick around for a couple of years. So moving on to the defense, I think there is potential here for this to be a solid unit. Unfortunately, injuries and suspensions are going to hold them back. Starting at the defensive line, this is really the weak spot of their team. The defensive line is not good, and I think they're actually undersized and kind of soft when you think about it. There just isn't a lot of talent up front here, and I think they're going to get pushed around quite a bit in the running game. They're relying on Corey Peters, Rodney Gunter, Zach Allen to be their starters. They just brought in Jonathan Bullard from the Chicago Bears. Just overall, not a very talented unit. I don't think they're going to be able to hold up against some of these more bigger physical teams that actually want to commit to the running game, and that's going to be a problem for them all season. If you can't stop the run, it really opens up what the other team can do offensively. Now, fortunately for them, I think their pass rush is somewhat solid. You have Chandler Jones still there, who is going to get double-digit stats, I'm assuming, because he just seems to do that every single season. They brought in Terrell Suggs, who I'm not really expecting too much for him. I think he came to Arizona more so because it's a nice place to retire. He went to school at Arizona State, and it's just a nice thing to do at the end of his career to kind of finish off at a place where he considers kind of another home for him. But regardless, he can still play in spurts. You got Cassius Marsh, Brooks Reed. Overall, not too much talent with this pass rush besides those top two guys. But even with that, I think they should be solid enough to put some pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They've improved that linebacker, like I mentioned before. I'm a big fan of Jordan Hicks. Hassan Riddick, you're hoping that he can develop as an inside linebacker for them. They tried to make him a pass rusher coming out of the draft, and they just really haven't found the right fit for him in their defensive schemes. They seem to line him up all over the place, and he just hasn't been able to develop whatsoever. So you're hoping that as he commits to being a full-time inside linebacker, that he can really step up and not be a bust for them as a first-round pick. But I think when I look at this defense as a whole, the secondary, when at full strength, it's a very good unit, I think. But they're going to be down their top two cornerbacks to start the season, which is really going to hurt them, I think, especially early on. Patrick Peterson, he's suspended for the first 8 games of the year due to PEDs, so you're definitely missing him. Peterson is one of the top 2 or 3 cornerbacks in the entire NFL still, a guy who's going to be a future Hall of Famer someday. So that's a huge loss for this team. Robert Alford, then, who they signed, he's going to be missing time due to injury. He might miss the majority of the season. So, I mean, that's really tough. Now, they do have some young depth there to kind of hopefully replace those guys, especially early on. I look at Byron Murphy especially. He could have, a big-time rookie year because he's been getting a lot of playing time, obviously. They will be helped out, though, by a safety unit that's pretty solid. DJ Swearinger and Budda Baker are 2 very solid, good safeties for them, especially Budda Baker, who's kind of like a Swiss Army knife in the secondary. He lines up in the slot. He can play that free safety role. He's not afraid to go into the box and hit. I like what they have at safety. And overall, if this secondary was 100%, I would actually be very high on this defense as a whole, even with the problems, the run defense. Unfortunately, I just don't think they're going to be able to cover people consistently throughout the season, which really hurts them as a unit. So overall, when I look at the schedule and look at this team as a whole, I think this is going to be one of the worst teams in all football once again. I think worst case scenario, they're a one-win team, and that's if Kyler Murray isn't ready and the offensive line is just worst case scenario. It's just absolutely atrocious, even worse than I think they're going to be. And if this defense can't put it together, then this team has a lot of holes in it. I think they're going to be pretty bad. But if Kyler Murray and this offense do develop and they start to show some flashes, especially late in the year when they can get a little bit healthier and get some of their guys back, I think this is definitely a team that could surprise some people and be competitive in a few games against some tough opponents and win 6 games. They definitely have some exciting pieces on offense. Overall, I think they go 4-12 this year. So not very high so far on the Cardinals. So moving on, we're going to go to the San Francisco 49ers, who came off another rough year due to injury once again last season. Jimmy Garoppolo was out for basically the entire year after tearing his ACL in week 3, and they just were not able to recover after that. They have high expectations, though, and that can be seen with what they did in the free agency period to kind of bring in some additional veteran help to this team. You look at Quan Alexander, linebacker from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, on a 4-year, $54 million contract. That's a bit of an overpay for a guy who wasn't all that good in Tampa Bay before he got injured, and then he tore his ACL last season and basically missed that entire year in 2018. But he's a guy, when healthy, who's very athletic in space. He can cover. He can run sideline to sideline. Definitely an upgrade for them in their linebacking core. I'm just not sure if he's worth the price tag. But I think the best move for them in this offseason was trading a future second-round pick for Dee Ford from the Kansas City Chiefs. I thought that was a complete steal. Now, Dee Ford, he's a bit of a liability in the running game, but that's fine. In this scheme where it's very similar to what Seattle did for a long time, Dee Ford is going to be kind of that 4-3 outside linebackers / defensive end pass rusher type, where he's going to be playing off the ball in base formations, and then they're going to put his hand in the dirt and allow him to rush the passer in sub formations and in passing downs. So that's Dee Ford's role, I think, in this scheme. I think he fits that very well. Again, if they can keep him off the line of scrimmage where he doesn't have to defend the run as much, I think that's going to be the best thing for them. But he definitely adds some juice for them in the pass rush. This was a defense last year that couldn't take the ball away. They couldn't pressure the quarterback. And Dee Ford definitely solves one of those issues. He's a guy who, when healthy, can definitely pressure and get after the quarterback. They also made some other moves to this team on defense. Look at Jason Verrett, who is a very talented cornerback coming from the Los Angeles Chargers. Unfortunately, he just seems to get injured every single year. So if he can stay healthy, he could be a very nice option for them as their number 2, maybe even number 1 corner. So they bring him in on a 1-year deal. David Mayo to compete at linebacker again on a 2-year deal. But I think another good sign for them came on offense when they brought in Tevin Coleman, running back from the Atlanta Falcons, on a 2-year contract. Very good value there. He was with Kyle Shanahan before when he was the offensive coordinator in Atlanta when they went to the Super Bowl. He knows how to use him in his system, and I think he's going to have a nice role as a complementary running back in this scheme. In terms of who they lost, not really any big names here. They let guys like Pierre Garçon and Malcolm Smith go. They also lost Cassius Marsh, who was probably their best edge rusher last year, but that's not really saying much. Alfred Morris, they lost him to the Dallas Cowboys, and they let go of Earl Mitchell to the Seattle Seahawks as a defensive tackle. So transitioning to the draft, this is a team that needs to address the pass rush, I think, in this draft early on, because they just were not able to get a consistent push up front, and that will help them be able to create turnovers, I think, at the secondary level as well. And I think they were in luck here because this draft was full of pass rushing talent, especially on the edge. And they went with the guy who's probably the safest pick in this draft, Nick Bosa, the 2nd overall pick out of Ohio State. Now, he does have some question marks in terms of his injury history and whether he will be able to stay healthy at the next level. But Nick Bosa, he's almost like shockingly similar to his brother Joey Bosa with the Chargers. He's a guy that is not really an explosive athlete necessarily, but he's got prototypical size. He's got great hand usage. He's very polished as a pass rusher, and he's a guy with his frame. He's going to be able to hold up in the running game, and he's just got a great motor playing the game, and he's got great instincts. He's a guy that I think will be a consistent double-digit sack producer every single year. And you can see with the rest of this draft for the 49ers that they wanted to help build this offense a little bit more. In the second round, they got a guy like Deebo Samuel, who's a wide receiver out of South Carolina, very explosive with the ball in his hands. Round 3, they got Nick Hurd, wide receiver out of Baylor, another explosive playmaking type of guy. Then got in the 6th round, Caden Smith, tight end out of Stanford, a guy that can maybe hopefully contribute in the passing game in the middle of the field there as kind of like a backup to George Kittle. So overall, when I break down this roster, on the offensive side of the ball, we're going to start there. I think Kyle Shanahan, he's one of the better offensive minds in the entire NFL. I think he's going to help this team kind of overachieve in terms of that aspect. Unfortunately, I'm not really buying into Jimmy Garoppolo as a franchise quarterback. I know there are a lot of people out there that absolutely love him and think that he's the next big thing, but I just haven't seen it yet. And his sample size is very, very small. I think he's only had, 12 starts so far in his NFL career, just a ridiculously small sample size. And I think anyone thinking that he's going to be a surefire franchise quarterback is crazy at this point. He hasn't done anything yet. I mean, he won 5 meaningless games for the 49ers, 2 seasons ago when they traded for him from the New England Patriots, and everyone thought he's the next big thing. But if you look at his career in San Francisco statistically, his stats are actually very remarkably similar to Nick Mullins, who was an undrafted 4th-string practice squad player for the 49ers going into last offseason. And he came in and he was just as good as Jimmy Garoppolo was statistically last season. So to me, I'm just not buying into it quite yet. I need to see him actually do the job before actually committing to him as a guy that can lead this 49ers team to a playoff berth and maybe potentially a Super Bowl down the road. But there are some talented pieces around him, I will say, to kind of help him adjust to being the true franchise quarterback for this team. You look at the running back position, I really like the combination of Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman. Both guys are very explosive in the open field. Both guys can catch the ball in the backfield. And Kyle Shanahan, he's one of the best offensive coordinators in the league in terms of developing a running game. His running scheme comes from that zone stretch. Mike Shanahan's game, obviously, with Kyle Shanahan being Mike Shanahan's son. He is able to generate 1,000-yard rushers every single year, no matter who is a running back and no matter who is on the offensive line. So they're going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to be able to do some things out of the backfield in the passing game as well. And in terms of who he has at receiver, it obviously starts with George Kittle, who's one of the top 3 tight ends in all of football, a guy that is very good after the catch, and he's a perfect fit for this zone stretch offense, a guy who can catch the ball short and make plays after the catch, but he's also got the speed to run vertically down the field and stretch the defense a little bit in the middle. So you like what they have there. Now, they are a bit unproven at wide receiver because they're so young. Marquise Goodwin is a guy with very good speed. Dante Pettis, who they drafted last year, he's a guy that's going to contribute quite a bit. And we'll see if they can get anything out of their 2 rookie wide receivers. They certainly have talent. They just need to step up and make some plays now. In terms of their offensive line, I think they're just okay. They're very good at left tackle and right tackle, though, at those 2 spots. I really like Joe Staley and Mike McGlinchey, who they drafted last season. That's a very nice combo for them, but their interior is just kind of average at best for me. Laken Tomlinson, I'm not a huge fan of at left guard. Mike Persons, not all that great at right guard either. And then I think Weston Richburg is probably pretty solid at center, so you like that there. But overall, this offensive line definitely isn't a dominant unit, but like I mentioned before, that doesn't really matter with a Shanahan offense because they are always able to kind of have that unit overachieve, especially in the running game. Pass protection, though, might be a bit of an issue, which will hold back the Jimmy Garoppolo and his development, I think, just a little bit. So overall, when I look at this 49ers offense, I think they are a above average unit at this point, maybe leaning a little bit more towards average. But I think, like I mentioned, Kyle Shanahan will be able to get this team to kind of play to the best of their ability, especially late in the year once they kind of figure out who they are as an offense. Now, transitioning to the defense, overall, you have to start up front. They have a very talented pass rush. You look at what they did on the edge, bringing in Bosa and Ford. That's one of the best duos, I think, in the NFL, especially with how young they are as well. If they can stay healthy, which has been a struggle for them so far in the season, that's an edge rush that's going to be very talented, and they're going to get after quarterbacks. And that really helps them out because DeForest Buckner in the middle of that defense as a defensive tackle, I think has developed into a star type of talent for this team. He's a guy that I was a big fan of coming out of the draft a few seasons ago, and he has lived up to my expectations so far. Now, you're hoping that you can get something out of Eric Armstead and Solomon Thomas, who have not worked out as interior pass rushers whatsoever. But we'll see what they can do there. Overall, those top three guys of Bosa, Ford, and Buckner, they're going to be able to get after the quarterback pretty consistently, I think, when healthy. Now, they're also improved at linebacker as well. I already mentioned Alexander, who's a fast, speedy type of guy in that defense. But Fred Warner really stepped up last year as well, I think, as a rookie. Another guy who maybe doesn't have great size for the position, but he's very fast on the sideline. He's got good coverage skills. So you like that duo in that second level of the defense at linebacker, where you have two guys that can run all over the field and make plays in the running game and in the passing game as well. So you like that there. Unfortunately, this defense really takes a step back because of the secondary. There's just so many question marks here. Obviously, Richard Sherman, he's still a very productive player, even though he's older and not the same dominant force he was in Seattle, but he's still very productive in this scheme at that left cornerback position. That they need some of these younger players to step up. At the quarterback position, you're relying on guys like Quan Williams, Akela Witherspoon. You're hoping Jason Ferrett can stay healthy and step up. Jimmy Ward, overall, just not a very talented unit there. And I think their safety duo is one of the worst in all of football. You got Tart and Travarius Moore starting at safety. Again, just not a lot of talent in the back end of the secondary here, and that's going to be something that I think a lot of teams are going to exploit, and I would not be surprised if the 49ers are a team that are going to be forced to have to win shootouts because this secondary just can't cover anybody, and they can't force turnovers. So overall, when I look at this 49ers team as a whole, it would not surprise me if things do work out and Jimmy Garoppolo is the guy. If this team sneaks up on a lot of people and they go out there and they make the playoffs as a 10-win team, I think they absolutely do have that talent, especially on offense, where you look at a guy like Kyle Shanahan will get the most out of that unit. They have a pass rush. But if things don't work out for them, if Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the guy, if their defense is a bit of a problem, especially in the secondary, then I think worst case scenario, this is a 5-win team at minimum. So overall, I have them going 8-8. I think they're a 500 team. They're going to compete for a wild card spot, but unfortunately, a lack of talent at certain position groups is what's going to hold them back going into this season. So moving on to the third team in the NFC West, we had the Seattle Seahawks, who kind of made a surprise playoff run last season. A lot of people were not expecting them to go out there and make that type of push towards the playoffs, especially early on when they started off 0-2. A lot of people kind of, counted them out, so to speak, and especially when Earl Thomas went down, lost him for the year with a broken leg. That was just a big blow to this organization. But I thought they recovered very well. Russell Wilson was amazing once again, got the most out of what they had on offense. They were the best rushing team in all football besides the Baltimore Ravens last season. And their defense, even though they're not the most talented group anymore, they were able to kind of put together a solid year overall. So going to this offseason, they didn't really have a lot of cap space to maneuver with, just due to the fact that they had to give Russell Wilson a big money extension, and a lot of their cap money was going to go towards him. So they made some smaller additions like Ezekiel Ansah, Mike Iupati, Al Woods at defensive tackle, and Earl Mitchell at the defensive tackle position. But they lost a lot of key players, I think, on this team. The big one is obviously Earl Thomas, the last player in that Legion of Boom unit. They lost him to free agency to the Baltimore Ravens. And then they decided, because they weren't going to be able to pay him, they decided to trade Frank Clark, defensive end, to the Kansas City Chiefs for a boatload of picks. That was a trade that I didn't really like it necessarily, just because I felt like you have Russell Wilson in the prime of his career. You want to maximize the opportunity with a good pass rusher. But Frank Clark is a guy that I don't think he's necessarily on second view, and I don't think he's a true difference maker as a pass rusher, but he's still very good. So I think to get all that value for him does make sense. It's a tough blow to this defense, but as I'll get to later, they were able to fill that anyway, I think, later in the offseason. They also lost guys like Justin Coleman to the Lions as a slot corner. He was a very solid player for them. Doug Baldwin their number one wide receiver for the last few seasons in this era of football for the Seahawks. He retired, so you lose some productivity on the offensive side of the ball. Shamar Stefan, defensive tackle to the Vikings. You lose him there. J.R. Sweezy, that's not a huge loss. He's not very good anyway. And then Mike Davis, who was a nice third down back for them. They lost him to the Bears. So a lot of moving parts for the Seahawks in this offseason. And then you look at what they did in the draft. In round one, they go out there and they get a pass rusher and L.J. Collier now out of TCU. I think that was a bit of an overdraft, though. I think he was more of a second or third round talent. But nonetheless, if you're going to get rid of your best pass rusher, Frank Clark, you got to make sure that you invest in the pass rusher then to kind of replace that production. So I don't mind reaching on a pass rusher in that sense, but I really do like what they did with some of the other picks in this draft. In round two especially, Marquise Blair, safety out of Utah, I really liked him coming out of the draft, and he's already impressed in the preseason so far. DK Metcalf then, who was hyped up as this otherworldly talent at wide receiver. I never bought into the hype, but he definitely has a lot of athletic upside due to his build and his speed and his size. I think he's a good fit in this offense as a deep threat and a red zone threat for Russell Wilson. So I like that pick for them late in the second round out of Ole Miss. You look at some of the other picks in this draft. Gary Jennings in the fourth round is a solid wide receiver to kind of add to this unit. I really like the pick of Ugo Amadi, defensive back out of Oregon, a guy who can play safety as well as slot corner, but can also contribute on special teams as well. So I really like that pick for them. And then they add to the running back rotation with Travis Homer, running back out of Miami. So overall, good draft for this team. But I think the big move that needs to be discussed for the Seahawks just happened recently, right before the season starts. And we see this, it seems like every single year we have a guy who's holding out, and then the team decides to trade him at the last minute right before the season. Last year it was Khalil Mack. This year it was Jadeveon Clowney. And I thought the Seattle Seahawks got an absolute steal for Jadeveon Clowney here. Just absolutely masterful, I think, what John Snyder, the GM, did with this offseason in terms of the value, evaluating players and getting compensation for them, and then making moves to make this team better as a whole. They got Jadeveon Clowney for a third-round pick, Barkevius Mingo, and Jarrell Martin, I think, another linebacker who honestly doesn't really matter anyway. It doesn't matter because Jadeveon Clowney, he's not, he's not on the level of a J.J. Watt or an Aaron Donald or Khalil Mack necessarily or Von Miller, but he's a guy that's in that second tier of great pass rushers, a guy that you can line up all over the field, all over the formation, and he's going to be very productive for you. I thought that was an absolute coup for the Seattle Seahawks to get a productive edge rusher. Now, they're not going to be able to re-sign him until after the season, which is why I think they were able to get him for such low value. But ultimately, if they don't re-sign him, I think you don't really give up much anyway to go out and get him. So I thought that was a worthy investment to make. Jadeveon Clowney could absolutely make this team very good into the season. And that's where we're going to go to when breaking down this roster, starting on the offense. I think this offense is set up to be a pretty good unit as a whole based around a power run game. There's going to be a very old-school offense, I think, with their offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer. Russell Wilson, it starts with him. He's one of the top three quarterbacks in all football, in my opinion. He's one of the elite passers in the entire game. He's going to maximize the talents surrounding him like he has done every single year over the past couple seasons. And they have a solid 1-2 punch at running back to kind of complement his talents as well. When you look at Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, Chris Carson was a guy that had a breakout season last year, rushing over 1,000 yards. I think he's going to have similar production once again. And you're hoping Rashad Penny can really step up in his second year. I was a big fan of him coming out of the draft, but not as a first-round pick. So you're hoping that he can kind of have a bigger role in this offense. Now, when I look at this offensive line, I don't think it's actually that terrible. It's not a complete dumpster fire as it has been in previous years. You have Dwayne Brown, who's still a very solid left tackle. Justin Britt has been a solid at center for them. DJ Fluker and Ethan Poshish are okay at the guard positions. Definitely not good, but they're good at the running game. The pass blocking, not so much. Jermaine Ifedi has actually turned his career around from a bust to an actually somewhat serviceable player at the right tackle position. So overall, this offensive line, while it's not good whatsoever, but it doesn't really keep this team from doing what they want to do on offense, which I think will go a long way because Russell Wilson, he's kind of a magician. He can kind of pull a rabbit out of his hat, even with subpar talent around him. As long as the offensive line can stay out of his way and just not completely be terrible, this offense will be fine around him. Now, in terms of what will hold this offensive back is the talent at the receiving positions. They're just very average, I think, so far. At these receiving spots, the tight end position is really non-existent. You have Nick Vanette and Will Dissly, who, neither of those guys are really anything special whatsoever. Tyler Lockett is one of the most explosive playmakers in the entire NFL. He's kind of a poor man's Tyreek Hill. So you got to like him there combined with Russell Wilson. Those guys have a great chemistry together, and they will make a lot of big plays at a lot of opportune moments this season. But they need one of these young guys to step up, whether it's DK Metcalf, whether it's Gary Jennings, whether it's other guys like David Moore or Jerron Brown. They need someone to make that next step at the number 2 wide receiver position because Tyler Lockett cannot do it by himself. He's not that type of player. So if someone can step up at the wide receiving position, then this offense will be set to be a very good unit this season. If not, it's going to be a lot of the same that we've seen over the past 5 years or so, where Russell Wilson, they're going to try and run the ball, and Russell Wilson is just going to be amazing, trying to elevate the rest of the unit as a whole. Now, on defense, I think with the trade of Jadeveon Clowney, this team is definitely a top 10 unit on the defensive side of the ball, and it all starts up front with one of the best front sevens, I think, in the entire NFL. Jadeveon Clowney, I think he adds another element to this pass rush, which is improved, by the way. You add in a guy like Zeke Ansah, who, if he can stay healthy, he's not a double-digit sack guy anymore, but he certainly is a guy that can be productive as a number 2 pass rusher, I think, in this scheme. You also look at the defensive line. It all starts with Puda Ford up front. He's one of the most underrated players in the NFL, a guy who's an absolute monster stopping the run, kind of an undersized, stocky defensive tackle. You also have Al Woods coming in from the Indianapolis Colts as another run stopper. Overall, very good talent up front, and they'll be able to stop the run and get after the passer pretty consistently. And then you move to the linebacking core, and I think they have the best linebackers by far in the NFL. Bobby Wagner, he's the best middle linebacker in football right now. First ballot type of Hall of Famer, I think, when you look at it in the future of his career. KJ Wright is very solid as their strong side linebacker. And then you got Michael Kendricks, who, if he can stay out of legal trouble, is a guy that can contribute as well. And then Shaq Griffin, who they drafted last year in the 5th round, who's thought to be more of a 5th-round pick due to the fact that he's only playing with one hand. I think he's going to have a role in this defense as well as the Sam linebacker for them. So, again, really like this linebacking core. I think it's the best in football. Very talented. Now, if there's one weakness in this defense, it is the secondary. I think they're very young and they're very inexperienced as of right now. Obviously, you have Shaquille Griffin at one quarterback spot and Trey Flowers at the other. They're a solid duo right there, but nothing really special. I do like the addition of Ugo Amadi in the slot, and then the safeties are just fine to me. Trey Flowers and Tedrick Thompson are just okay. Or I should say Brad McDougal and Tedrick Thompson are just okay. So, I mean, nothing really special in the secondary here, but if they can have a dominant pass rush up front, and we know they're going to be well coached with Pete Carroll, one of the better coaches in all football, he's going to get the most out of these guys, I think. And overall, like I said before, you're looking at a top 10 defense, I think, with the Seattle Seahawks once again. So when I look at this team as a whole, looking at their schedule, I think this team is definitely a playoff team, and I actually think they will go and contend for a division crown in the NFC West, which I know a lot of people aren't really looking at them in that sort of fashion, but I think this might be the most complete team in the entire division. I think worst case scenario, they're a 9-win team. I don't think they're going to be a losing record whatsoever. I think Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll are too good of a head coach and quarterback duo to make that happen. Best case scenario, their defense really takes it to another level and someone steps up at the other wide receiver spot. Russell Wilson has a big year once again, and they win 12 games. Overall, I see the Seahawks actually going out there and winning 11 games this season. So very high in the Seahawks. We'll see what they do now going into this year. And then moving on to the last team in the NFC West, we're going to end with the Los Angeles Rams coming back from that Super Bowl loss where they just were not able to get it done. They went all in last year to kind of go out there and win Super Bowl with Jared Goff on his rookie contract, bringing in guys like Ndamukong Suh, Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters, a bunch of older veteran players to kind of contribute on this team. And they went far. They almost got there, but ultimately Bill Belichick just kind of outsmarted them in that Super Bowl. They were not able to get anything going on offense. So you look at what they did in free agency, it was pretty clear that they had to let some guys go due to salary cap reasons. They had to pay Jared Goff a big contract in the next year or two. So they didn't really make any big major moves. They brought in two veteran players on defense, Eric Weddle on a 2-year deal and Clay Matthews at outside linebacker on a 2-year deal. But they lost a lot of players that were big-time contributors for their team last year. It starts up front at the offensive line position. Roger Saffold, who left in free agency at the left guard position, to the Tennessee Titans. He was quite possibly their best offensive lineman last year, I thought, watching him play. So that's going to be a big loss for them. They also lost their starting center, John Sullivan, due to retirement. That's a veteran presence, once again, on that offensive line that they're going to miss, I think. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you lose guys like LaMarcus Joyner, who's kind of a versatile do-it-all safety for them in the back end of that secondary. Mark Barron, starting linebacker, and then Ndamukong Suh, who they brought in on a 1-year deal. He didn't really play up to his expectations last season, but he was certainly a guy that in the playoffs was a much better impact, I think, than he's given credit for. He was very good in that playoff run to the Super Bowl. And then they also lost C.J. Anderson as well, the running back spot, to the Detroit Lions. He kind of came in out of nowhere late in the year when Todd Gurley was dealing with that knee injury and was very productive down the stretch for this team. So that's going to be a bit of loss for them at depth at running back. In terms of the draft, they traded out of the first round. So without a first-round pick, I thought they were able to put together a pretty solid draft when you look at the entire thing. The second round, Taylor Rapp, safety out of Washington. He lacks the athleticism that you want from a modern-day safety, but he's a very solid player, very good tackler, very good instincts. He's a guy that I think is going to be a solid starter eventually once he can kind of get a role on this defense and get acclimated to the NFL game. And then in the third round, they had 3 picks. They first got Darrell Henderson, running back on Memphis, a big play threat. At the running back position, very good speed in the open field. David Long, quarterback out of Michigan, and then Bobby Evans, an offensive tackle from Oklahoma. So I like what they did in the third round as well. In terms of other picks that I like in this draft, David Edwards, offensive tackle out of Wisconsin in the 5th round, I thought was pretty solid. You can never go wrong adding to your depth along the offensive line. So I thought that was pretty solid for them as well. But overall, I don't think they got any stars in this draft, but I think they were able to get some guys that can act as some depth and maybe even potential starters for this team down the road. They're a bit of an older team, though, anyway. So I think they're not really relying on any of these rookies to really have a big impact in year one, but guys that will contribute down the line for this team. When I break down this roster as a whole, we're going to start off with the offense. They had, for the majority of last year, an historic run on offense. They were one of the top 3 units in all football for the majority of the year. I think, unfortunately for them, that they're going to see some regression this season, and a lot of that is due to the fact that I just don't buy Jared Goff right now as an elite franchise quarterback. I think he's certainly a low-level franchise guy. I think he's a guy that the Rams should definitely look to extend because he has a great relationship with McVay, and he's just has good chemistry with this unit as a whole, so you don't want to get rid of that necessarily. But he was very bad late down the stretch last season. After that Kansas City Monday Night Football game, which was one of the best football games I've ever seen, by the way, Jared Goff took a huge step back statistically. When you look at his statistics after that game, for the rest of the regular season, and going into the playoffs, his passer rating was a passer rating of 73.66. Not good whatsoever. The explanation point of that entire stretch was the game against the Chicago Bears, where he threw 4 interceptions and was just awful. But during that entire stretch in the playoffs and the last few games of the regular season, he threw more interceptions than touchdowns in that stretch. So they did not get a lot from Jared Goff late down the stretch, even though they were able to kind of get to the Super Bowl despite his play. Anyway, overall, if Jared Goff cannot kind of take the next step as a quarterback and kind of bounce back from a rough last month or so of the season, then I'm sorry, I just do not see this team being that consistent, dominant offensive threat that they once were. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I just don't know what the status is of Todd Gurley at the running back position. Now, Todd Gurley, he was dealing with that knee injury, it seemed like, for the entire second half of the year last year. And they really haven't clarified what that was or what is the issue here. It's kind of a mystery at this point. Now, fortunately, I think for the Rams here, they have a nice, some pretty solid depth behind him when you look at Malcolm Brown, who they re-signed, and obviously the aforementioned Darrell Henderson. So there are some guys on this roster that can step up if he can't get the touches that you want him to get, and they kind of have to do a running back by committee for the majority of the season to kind of keep him fresh for the playoffs. There is some solid depth there, but overall, if Todd Gurley, if he can't be the player that he was last year, I don't think this offense will be nearly as good as they were, because he really is the guy that kind of helps this offense go. Without him being a dominant force in the running game, this offense will not be the same. So they need him to stay healthy for the entire year. Now, they do have some great weapons at wide receiver as well. I like the trio at wide receiver with Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, and Cooper Kupp. All those guys kind of complement each other. We kind of saw last season where Cooper Kupp, he went down due to injury late in the year, and his offense, especially in the passing game, was not the same after that. So if he can stay healthy, I think he's a very nice piece for them as a possession guy on third down to kind of help extend drives. Nice safety valve for Jared Goff in the passing game. And they're pretty solid at tight end as well. You have Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, two solid receiving options at the tight end position. We know Sean McVay is going to do a lot of three wide receiver sets with one tight end. That's what he's done pretty much his entire time here as the coach of the Los Angeles Rams. So they're going to be doing a lot of those type of sets, and we'll see if they can kind of continue that success in the receiving core with this unit. Now, if there's one thing that's going to hold this offensive line back besides the player Jared Goff and besides the health of Todd Gurley, it has to be up front on the offensive line. This offensive line is not as good as they were last season, and they're going to be missing two starters in that interior unit. You still have guys like Andrew Whitworth here, who's playing at a high level, Rob Havenstein, one of the most underrated right tackles in football, and then Austin Blythe, who's pretty solid at right guard. But we still have no idea how good Joseph Noteboom is at left guard, or how good Brian Allen is at center. Both of those guys are unproven young players, and we'll see if they can step up as starters this season, because one of the reasons why they were so successful in offense last year was their offensive line was able to dominate teams up front, especially in the running game. And if they can't do that, that's going to be a huge question mark, I think, for this offense, and whether they can kind of repeat that success as a top three unit. So moving over to the defense, I think this defense is above average unit to potentially pretty good. And that's in a lot of ways due to the star talent they have all across the board. But there are holes all over the place at many position groups. But I think any mention of the Rams defense, you have to start with Aaron Donald, who is probably the best player in the NFL right now. He's probably the most impactful player in the league by far. This guy is just an absolute beast. I mean, he had 20.5 sacks last year as a defensive tackle. That's just crazy. That never happens, ever. So Aaron Donald, he's so good. But other than him, there really isn't another impactful player in this front seven. You have Michael Brockers, who's a very good run stopper, but he doesn't really offer anything in the pass rush. Some other guys on this defensive line, you have Sebastian Joseph Day. It's going to be like their starting nose tackle. Doesn't really add anything in terms of a pass rush whatsoever. And then on the edge, they're relying on guys like Clay Matthews and Dante Fowler to kind of be their kind of guys that can push the pocket from the outside linebacker position, but neither of those guys, I don't think, are consistent forces, especially Dante Fowler. I look at him. They traded for him from the Jaguars last season. He was kind of not a bust, but definitely a disappointment in Jacksonville. And, he's at times has shown flashes of being a number one or even number two pass rusher, but he's just not consistent whatsoever. So I don't really trust him to be a consistent force on the edge. And then Clay Matthews just simply can't play anymore. I should know this as a Bears fan watching him play with the Green Bay for so long. Really, over the past 3 or 4 years, it's been pretty clear that he's washed up. So he's not a good player on this team. You're hoping that a guy, other players on this team can kind of step up. Guys like Sam Epukam, step up at that other edge position, but I'm not a huge fan of what they have there. it really might be a case of Aaron Donald doing all the pass rushing once again for this team. And then transitioning to the linebackers, there's some question marks here as well. You have Corey Littleton, who's very solid. He's kind of an undersized safety hybrid type of player. He's very good in pass coverage, but he's a bit of a liability in the running game just because he doesn't have the ability to take on blocks. And again, there really isn't a lot of talent in this unit. You have Bryce Hager, who's slated to start at the other spot. Troy Reeder is a rookie that they're hoping that he can step up maybe as a rotational player. Overall, like I mentioned before, outside of Aaron Donald, there's just not a lot of talent in this front seven. Now, when I transition to the secondary, it's kind of the opposite. There is a lot of talent in the secondary, and that's what's really going to help them, I think. You have a really good combination of corners, I think, in Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters. Now, a lot of people are down on Marcus Peters, and I understand that. He did not have a good season last year. It was very disappointing, I thought. He was a guy that I thought of him as kind of a top 10 corner in the NFL when they made that trade, and he was very, very awful even at times last season. But I thought he was able to put it together late in the year, especially in the playoffs. He was a lot more sticky in coverage. He was able to make some plays on the football late in the year. And I think he's a guy, if Aqib Talib can stay healthy and be that guy that can take pressure off of him, Marcus Peters could have a bounce-back year and kind of reestablish himself as one of the better young corners in all of football. I really do believe that. He's a very talented football player. So I like what they have at the quarterback position there. You also have Nikel Roby-Coleman in the slot, a very good slot corner for them. So overall, they're talented at quarterback, and they have good, solid depth there. And then at the safety position, you have Eric Weddle, who they brought in as a veteran presence, and then John Johnson, who's kind of a box safety for them. And then Taylor Rapp kind of fits that box safety mold as well. So you like what they have in the secondary overall. I think that's going to be the strength of this defense. And they can figure out a pass rush besides Aaron Donald. Overall, this defense could be very, very good. But unfortunately, because of the lack of a pass rush, I just don't see this defense being all that impactful. I think they're going to underachieve once again overall on this side of the ball. But we will see. Overall, when we look at the Rams here, I think they're definitely a team that's going to be in the hunt for the playoffs all season long. They did lose some pieces, and they're not as talented, I think, as last year's team. But there's certainly they should definitely be in the mix, I think, for an NFC West title once again. I think worst case scenario, they go 8-8, and that's if Jared Goff doesn't develop, I think, and if that's the defense doesn't really do much this year besides Aaron Donald being amazing. That is the worst case scenario for me. Best case scenario, Jared Goff takes that next step as a quarterback. The offensive line isn't a problem. Todd Gurley's healthy, and that defense is able to get one or two guys to step up. I think they're a 12-win team this season. But overall, I have the Rams going 10-6, and if you've been following this episode, you can see that is not first place in this division. That is second place. So overall, when I look at the NFC West, I have the Seattle Seahawks winning this division at 11-5, and the Rams finishing in second at 10-6. I think this team is going to have kind of a Super Bowl hangover type of year where they take a step back, and they're going to have to deal with that, I think, for the majority of the season. So those are my thoughts on the NFC West. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below if you agree or you disagree. The next division I'll be covering will be the last division of the AFC West, so I'm excited to do that division. You guys can take a look out for that. Thanks, guys, for watching so much.